With decades of experience representing airports, your Airport Legislative Alliance brings you Washington Insider Update.
Welcome to another Washington Insider Update. I'm Joel Bacon with the ALA staff, and I'm joined in the studio this morning by AAA Meetings and International President Spencer Dickerson, who also serves as Executive Director of the U.S. Contract Tower Association. We are one day out from sequestration taking place on March 1st, so we wanted to bring you up to speed on the broader impacts of what we're expecting as this plays out in the near future, and talk about specifically the immediate impacts that these cuts may have on the contract tower program, and those towers affected clearly in the early tranches of big impacts at those facilities. So we're going to talk to Spencer about that. Feel like we should be giving a disclaimer at the front end of this update that warning what you're about to hear is incredibly depressing, and it is, because we're a day out, no prospect of solving this impending $85 billion worth of cuts anytime soon, and really no way, at least a visible way, of how Congress and the administration are work to solve these, get rid of these cuts. Here's what we know at this point, based on what the FAA is telling us, testimony on the Hill this week from Administrator Huerta and others. The $85 billion worth of cuts spread out over the federal government to take place between March 1st and the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. For FAA, that means $600 million of reductions they're going to make. TSA, $300 million of reductions. CBP, another couple $100 million worth of reductions. Everyone in the administration warning big impacts on aviation operations, both on the air traffic side, with screeners at checkpoints, with CBP personnel. So we have dire warnings across the board. Again, March 1st, tomorrow, scheduled to take effect, but you won't see those the impacts of that until for a little bit. One of the most immediate impacts, and we're going to turn to Spencer shortly on that, is the contract tower program. FAA has said they're basically going to approach this by furloughing employees temporarily over the course of the rest of the fiscal year, by closing overnight tower operations at airports, and most immediately shutting down tower operations at 238 towers, including 189 in the contract tower program. The discouraging thing about this is, as I mentioned, no real way of knowing how we're going to deal with this. The Congress has a continuing resolution. Funding for the federal government expires at the end of March. This month, in the next couple of days, in fact, in the House next week, Congress is going to pass and deal with a continuing resolution to keep the government running beyond March 27th. The big question at this point is, do they attempt to deal with sequestration, replace some of those cuts, alter the way that they are scheduled to go into effect as part of that CR, or does this in fact drag out longer into the future? That's an open question at this point, and I think both sides, Republicans and Democrats, are waiting to see how all this shakes out, and if the effects of the sequestration are immediate, and who is taking the blame for those cuts going into effect. So the other piece of this that is also discouraging is we are talking about year one of 10 years potentially worth of sequestration cuts. This first installment is $109 billion in fiscal year 13. We are looking at $109 billion worth of annual cuts through 2021. So this is just the first installment of a whole series of cuts to domestic discretionary spending that are scheduled to take place over the next decade. For AAAE's part, we continue to make our push for a long-term funding solution, recognizing that federal funding for programs like AIP are in jeopardy and under constant scrutiny. We're pushing for our long-term plan and trying to get more local control in the form of PFCs, continuing to push to eliminate the cap on PFCs. So those efforts in Washington continue. So with that as a backdrop, let me now turn to Spencer Dickerson, Contract Tower Association. Spencer, first and arguably one of the most immediate impact of the sequestration will affect the Contract Tower Association. Where do we sit? What do we know right now about how those cuts and how they're going to impact contract towers?
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, it's very discouraging, and it's a shame because this program for 30 years has been a shining example of how the federal government and the private sector can work together to provide cost-effective air traffic control safety services and efficiency services in a way that makes sense. And the Department of Transportation Inspector General, even just last November, gave another A+ to the program. And now there's an assault on the program because of sequestration. So very disappointing for our members who rely on these towers and the aviation community that uses them. So where we are today, FAA sent out a list last Friday, published a list that had 238 control towers on the closure list. 189 of those are FAA contract towers. There are 251 total FAA contract towers. 49 towers are FAA staffed towers that are set for closure. What we learned yesterday is FAA told the contractors, the 3 contractors that manage these towers, that on April 1st, the lights will go off in 168 contract towers. And it's ironic that in the 30-year history of this program, of this contract tower program, that has bipartisan support on the Hill, there's been 3 towers closed, one every decade. And literally in one day, we're going to shut the lights off in 168 towers nationwide, almost 40% of towers across the country in one day. So the numbers work out: 168 towers on April 1st, and then the other 21 that make up that difference. Those are towers. Our funding is protected under general provision and operations, and 5 Air National Guards. That's 21. Those towers are scheduled to shut down on September 30th. So 168 on April 1st, the other 21 on September 30th. People have asked me what happens to the rest of the contract towers. I think it goes to your point of saying these cuts are going to continue in the future, and I would suspect that contract towers will be in the crosshairs of the administration, the rest of the contract towers, so this isn't over. You talked about the legislative fix that we have suggested. That's going to obviously be an uphill battle. So it's very, very discouraging, disappointing. Our members airports are doing a terrific job out in the field. Lots of media stories, lots of TV interviews that I've seen on the web, many, many newspaper stories, and they're getting all their congressional folks wound up. And so we're just going to keep the fight and do the best we can to try and protect this program, which has worked so well for aviation safety, aviation efficiency across the country.
Back up legislative fix and the message that we are delivered in the administration and on Capitol Hill. Walk us through that. What is the message we're trying to communicate?
We're asking our members to contact their congressional offices and ask those offices to contact the appropriations committees in the House and Senate, both full committee and the DOT-FAA Appropriations Subcommittee, and say, in the continuing resolution that Congress is going to have to pass, all we're asking for is a fair fix. The FAA cuts for other parts of FAA are about 5 to 8%. We're saying don't treat us any differently, contract towers. 5 to 8% the program can absorb, and we can be more efficient. But this cut represents a 75% cut. 189 of 251 contract towers, 75% cut. That doesn't seem very fair, and it's very disproportionate against contract towers to go from 5 to 8% to 75%. So we're just asking folks on the Hill to take a look at that as a possibility. It's going to be an uphill battle because everybody's asking for fixes, from FBI agents to Medicare to food inspectors, but that's our pitch.
Yeah, and I would just echo that that's exactly what we're hearing as we make the rounds on Capitol Hill to try to get that fix that Spencer highlighted. And that fix, again, just treat the contract tower program the same way you're treating other areas within the FAA operations budget in terms of cuts. There's a disproportionate cut aimed at contract towers, and all we're asking to do is to fix that. Todd Hopley, president of AAA Gov, and myself met with Tom Latham, who chairs the DOT Appropriations Subcommittee, yesterday on this. We're making the rounds with other folks, and as Spencer mentioned, what we're getting back is, we got to wait to see how things play out with the continuing resolution and how we approach this post-sequestration period. There may not be an appetite immediately to fix that just because there are so many other things that need to be fixed and addressed. But we need, as Spencer said, to keep banging the drum on Capitol Hill with folks that come April 1st, the lights go out, and we need to address that prior to getting to that point. Spencer, one other thing I wanted to ask you about, Administrator Huerta was up before the House Transportation Committee yesterday asked about these sorts of cuts, one of the things that he noted was, some of what they're seeing and anticipating is that the local communities may step in and try to pick up the gap between what the federal government had funded and what's not going to be there. So can the locals step in and address this and fix it? And is there any cause for concern there?
Well, in the notification that all the airports and the contractors will receive no later than this coming Monday, March 4th, what I understand, that's going to be a specific item in the letter saying if you want to keep your tower operating, contact your contractor and you can pay for it yourself as a local community. And there are a number of airports that will probably look at that because of their concern about safety, their concern about efficiency, their concern about businesses who require an operating tower, whether it's an airline or a flight school or business aviation operators. The cost of that is about $600,000 a year in that neighborhood. And I would just caution airports, if you go down that path, and we understand everybody's instincts here, that will not be temporary. If you step up and offer to pay for that tower, that will be permanent. That will not be returned back to the FAA. And of course, what we're saying on the Hill is that these local governments already have severe constraints. These communities are already having tough budget times, just like Washington is. To push more costs onto the local community on a program that has worked and has been cost effective to the taxpayers doesn't seem right. But I just want people to be absolutely clear. That will not be temporary. That will be a permanent thing. But a number of airports will do it because they feel the urgency to make sure their tower continues to operate.
And the other thing we're hearing, in addition to the locals are going to step in and solve this problem, is if these close down, they'll just turn them. Once we get a fix on this, we'll open these towers right back up as well.
Not going to happen. Towers. I mean, you never know what the future brings, and it's hard to predict in Washington. But it's hard for me to see any scenario where these towers would be reopened down the road. So this is really a permanent thing. And I want to also emphasize this really is about folks outside the Beltway making a difference. We're going to continue the fight here at AAAE. But this is about noise. This is about everybody that cares about their airport and their control tower. Businesses, tenants, the users, the airport, everybody, political, local business leaders calling the Hill and making the case that these towers need to stay open. So I thank the members for all their good work. Keep it up. Keep the fight going.
And along those lines, we'll have a link accompanying this video with a fact sheet that you can use. We've got a lot of information out there, but want to keep that in your hands so you can weigh in with your elected officials. Before we go, obviously a very busy March in front of us with a lot of jeopardy and a lot of unknowns at this point. So we urge you to stay tuned to your computer and the other avenues for receiving information from AAAE. We want to keep you up to date and make sure you have the latest talking points, the latest state of play, because it is going to be critical that we remain engaged as this plays out here over the next couple of weeks and potentially even longer. One thing to remind you of, the Washington Legislative Conference, the AAAE ACI Annual Spring Legislative Conference, March 20th and 21st here in Washington, D.C. A great opportunity to come make the rounds with your elected officials face-to-face on these issues. We have a lineup of members of Congress, the chairman of the Transportation Committee, Appropriations Committee on the House side, Aviation Subcommittee Chairman Frank Lobiondo from New Jersey, the Senate New Aviation Subcommittee Chair Kelly Ayotte from New Hampshire. The list goes on and on. Michael Huerta is going to be with us. It is an all-star lineup and a great opportunity for you to be in Washington to interact with those folks in addition to your elected officials. So thanks. Sorry to bombard you with so much information, but there's a lot going on in Washington with sequestration. Wanted to bring you up to speed on our overall efforts to deal with it and highlight specifically what's happening with the contract tower program, which again, we're being told lights go out on April 1st. So need you to keep banging away at folks and making noise here in Washington. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be in touch as the developments move forward with sequestration in Washington.
Experienced, effective, respected, AAAE ALA Federal Affairs membership delivers for you. Join today and get connected.